Hey, it's me, Nick. We have to stop meeting like this. This message is for all you pet owners out there. So we have a dog named Olga, and I record this podcast in my home studio. And because both Cathryn and I were involved in this episode, she needed to be where the action was and got tangled in some of the cables that we ran for the audio and video. So for part of this episode, around minute 8 or 9 and straight through the first half of the podcast, you'll hear the audio take quite a dip in quality. I did my best to clean it up, but you can thank Olga for the change in sound there. You'll also see the camera shift a few times throughout the podcast, and I do mention Olga in the podcast as well, so she is pretty heavily featured in here for all kinds of reasons. So keep that in mind and enjoy Cathryn's interview of me about my band Wreck's new album, KITE to Camden. Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 7, Episode 7 of Music is Not a Genre. Let's do it with me, MxG. We're going to turn it into a dance. I'm going to write a song about the gestures. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast. Watchers, go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre, and you can find this podcast anywhere if you would just rather listen and not stare at this wonderful shirt that you can get at my store, which is also on nickdimatteo.com. And of course, everyone go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to support this podcast and my band Wreck's music. Quick note about my sponsor for this season. It's Qobuz, Qobuz, which I always put on the screen now. Special stuff. It's a music streaming service, high-res files. So waves or AIFFs instead of MP3s, higher quality than Spotify or Apple if you are a standard listener there, and it costs about the same, and it has about the same amount of music on those. It has a bunch of extra features like interviews and album art and all the things that you might miss if you were a fan of physical music. So go check out Qobuz. I plan to do that eventually. And I am going to stop right there because this is an extremely special episode. As you may know from last week, I believe it was last week, I put out a special episode that was unnumbered. It's a bonus because it was all about my band Wreck's new album, KITE to Camden. And I mentioned that it was out and that you can get it on recarea.bandcamp.com. That's rec, R-E-C, area, one word, .bandcamp.com. And I talked a little bit about it, but I alluded to the fact that there will be a very special episode coming up in which I would go more in depth. And I have a very special guest for the podcast this week, and that guest is me. And along with me, I have brought my lovely interviewer and wife, Cathryn, to ask me some questions about KITE to Camden. So you get to learn all about it. So hello, Cathryn. How are you?
Hello. That was quite an intro.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I'm very practiced now.
I love that you are your own special guest today.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes. I'm very happy to have me on the show. And
yes. That's very cool. Well, I'm very happy to be here.
I'm very excited to be talking to you. We never talk.
We never talk.
Yeah.
My goodness.
On camera,
okay.
anyway.
I never hear anything about what you're doing.
Nah.
I am actually, I kid, of course, but I am very excited to actually ask you about your new work because I have been behind the scenes as far as the creation of it, seeing you in the throes of so many different jobs as far as what you do when you create a work. And so I'm excited to ask you about it. So everybody knows, of course, that you are a singer, songwriter, producer, a true multi-hyphenate, creator of the band Wreck, a podcaster, obviously, a voiceover artist, so many, many, many things. And that today we're going to focus on the singer, songwriter, producer aspect of what you do, particular to your new album that just came out. Very exciting. KITE to Camden.
Yeah.
Okay. How are you feeling now that it is out in the world?
Very excited. I always get nervous when I put out a new album because, you don't know response. And then when I get a good response, I'm very excited. And then I'm nervous again because there's all the business end aspect. But I realize that things are usually a slow boil, especially in the indie world. And it actually, for some reason this time around, got me even more excited that I have so much work to do on that end to get this out to the world.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes that can be such a dreaded thing for an artist is the after, but when you're really excited about something, to be able to really want to shout it out and get people really engaged with it is very, very cool.
Right. None of us are great. Well, I won't say none of us because if Robert Smith of The Cure was not great at business, and apparently when he took the band on hiatus, decided to get into it and learned so much about it that he changed the game, and he's trying to change it not just for The Cure but other artists. But most of us kind of suck at the business end and suck at the social media end because our focus is on creation and performance. So there is that nervousness there, but this is part of why I'm doing this, and part of why I am excited because I do have a kind of a small team helping me out this time.
That is very cool. Yeah, you deserve that support. So that's really exciting.
Thank you.
So let's talk about why you're excited about this particular album. This is the 10th rec release that you've done, but actually the 18th completed project that you've done since you've been producing music. Previously, before Rec, you produced for the name Nick. So you have a really long history of creating. You are one of the most creative people I have ever met, actually. But this album seems to really stand out. I know that you pulled some of the material that is on this album from things you wrote years ago, things that are very current. Obviously, there is a mix of genres throughout the album. But one thing when I listened to it that really stood out is that there seems to be a real specific, not even storyline, but there's a specific beginning to end journey on this album. It is 14 tracks and they are like synced one right after another. So you can really listen to it from beginning to end without ever stopping should you wish. And how was that to be able to make something that has that through line as opposed to just focusing on track to track to track and putting a compilation together? But really, was that something intentional or is that something just happened throughout the creative process?
This one was 100% intentional. I started planning this album probably during the sessions for The Weird Objective, those 5 releases in 2020. And certainly by 2021, I had started to take notes and decided that I wanted this to be one complete piece of work. As you mentioned, they're sequenced in a way where you can listen to them nonstop. Especially, and I'm going to say this as a musician and listener, there's something called gapless listening. Not every service has it. Bandcamp leaves maybe a half a second in between. Not bad. I'll take it. Same with SoundCloud, which I only have that for industry people right now. But when this eventually goes to streaming, and it's not on streaming yet, I do recommend that because it's a better listen if you can listen to it nonstop beginning to end. It's 54 minutes. And I am toying with the idea of releasing what I'm calling the KTC one shot, which is a 54-minute file, all of the songs together. So you have no choice but to listen. And this way, if you're listening on a player that doesn't have gapless, playing, then you can hear the whole thing all the way through. But yes, it was by design that I did this.
Excellent. Why do you think you wanted to approach an actual storyline in an album? From what I understand, you are, out of all of your professions or all of the facets of your work, you really are a singer-songwriter producer. And that is the thing that you love to do the most. You love to be in studio. You love to hit all different angles of a song. You do all of these instrumentation and singing and backup vocals. You do it all. And I know you really love focusing on that part. Not necessarily you do love lyrics, but you don't necessarily always focus on the lyrics first. So to approach this new work with a storyline in mind, what was the impetus for that?
Well, that's kind of funny because I didn't have a storyline in mind. What I had in mind was a musical flow. Was to create a world that you immediately enter into. I've had people say that first track on the album, linear A, parentheses 5/12/4. Ask me what that means. And I will tell you.
Ask him, please.
Yes, I love to talk about everything. It starts with a single tone, and that tone grows into a song, and that was the idea, was to kind of birth an album, almost as if the music was going through a birth canal and emerged out the other side with specifically track 3 as a fully formed verbal creature or whatever. So I had the idea of this musical flow. And once I got towards the end, I started to realize, oh no, this is actually telling if not a story, then at least a journey, like you mentioned. Yeah. And I had never really done that before. There's one release, it's called What It Is, 2000. It's an EP where all of the songs connected, where especially the first few songs, one bled into the other. But there was no story there. It was just me knowing that these songs went well together and they sounded good together. And maybe you can pick a story out of it, and, if you really try hard enough. But that was sort of in a way, a model for what I was doing with this album. But this album just went way above that.
Did you plan it to be a full-length album from the beginning?
Yes. And as a matter of fact, it's actually shorter than what I planned. There are 4 other tracks that I didn't get to, because when I got to the final track on this album, The Mad Philosopher, I realized that was such a perfect ending that there was no reason to add those tracks. So I plan, time permitting, to, I think I might call it like KITE to Camden Side 3. Ooh. And just do 3, maybe just 3 additional tracks. And almost as like a bonus, which other artists have done and actually used to do when physical music, existed more, where they would have a bonus disc inside there that was extra material away from the album. So I may do that. So you just put out a full-length album and you're already ready to release more material connected to the album. Yeah.
What did I say about creativity, everybody? This
Can't
is
help
what
it.
I'm talking about.
I don't really, that's the only way I know how to communicate. All right.
Yeah, like I said, one of the most creative and just consistent artists I've ever really known.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So I love that this was a different process for you. Shook you up a little bit. Do you think that this sonically or lyrically or just as a whole really stands out as an album that you could really say, is a spotlight moment in your career?
I think it will stand up as that through, the test of time, in part because I had started planning it so early, but also because the idea of the album from the very beginning was meant to have that type of meaning. And because I was pulling from sources as old as, I don't know, maybe 14, 15 years old and to as new as just a few weeks ago, I made sure to craft it such that there were no loose ends. And even though I always take care to vet my own lyrics and you write something that sounds amazing and then you sing it and you're like, that's ridiculous. And so you go and do it. Right. And so you rewrite it and you hone it until you get there. And there have been songs in my past that I feel like have that level of import and meaning and were pivot moments for me. Sure. But as far as a complete work, again, I would have to say that What It Is was probably the one that that was quite a long time ago. So I do think that this will measure as a kind of a transition moment for me. And in part because it's the first time, though I have done projects where every facet of my music has been represented, especially the Weird Objective, but each one of those 5 releases were programmatic. So there was a hip hop R&B one, there was an ambient one, whatever. This one has everything on it. And though each song has a template, all of the songs tend to mix in with each other to where you'll find elements of certain genres that started the album, the first 5, 6, 7 songs, show up again later on in the album. And that's my idea, is to create an amalgam of sounds that represents Rec as a project, as a band. And I don't think any other release that I've done really captures it like this one does.
So that's interesting. So let's talk about genre a little bit in respect to this new album, right? Okay, because you've been doing, obviously, Music is Not a Genre podcast now for quite a while. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. So since you've been doing this podcast, since you've been talking about this idea of genre in so many different ways, and especially how it relates to your own music, I've always known your music, and the big umbrella description is to be electro power pop. But of course, you love every kind of genre and been talking about how, they interweave with each other and root from the same place. Yeah. Do you think since you've been doing this podcast and been talking about it more, it was easier to be able to mix all of those genres within this album, or did you make it even more of a point to do that? Like you said, as opposed to the weird objective that you made very specific to each work, this one just melded. How was that? How did that inform the process?
Well, that's a great question because, first of all, I believe that I am going to be changing the description of my music because you do need a label. Even though you don't like them, you need a shorthand. You need that elevator pitch.
Absolutely.
From electro power pop to multi-phasic power pop.
Shit!
Because I like the sound of it. It's futuristic. It alludes to certain other stories and things that I'm doing, but also because that really does describe exactly what I do. The power of rock and funk and driving music, dance music. The pop of everything has some accessibility to it and hooks. And the multi-phasic meaning I don't care where the rest of the influence comes from, as long as it's something that I'm passionate about. And so what happened was when I finished the Sunshine Seminar, I said, well, this is the best I can do with Rec as it is, being electro power pop. I immediately started what would end up being the Weird Objective the following year. And it took a good 5 years for all of that to come together. And that idea was, don't do an amalgam. Maybe one album out of it was the amalgam, Synergy for the Weird. That's why it's Synergy. The other 4, go deep into those genres and really explore them as much as possible to see what moves me, to see what I'm good at, to see what I need to improve at, to see how I can add nuance to each of those. And then coming out the other side, how do I take all of that and put it all together? Mm-hmm. And that's what this is.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. I have never heard multi-phasic power pop before.
Invention.
I live with you. We do a lot of work from home. We see each other all the time. I see your madman working, and I have not heard that yet. So that's exciting. I've never heard multi-phasic power pop out in the world.
I've got to say I coined it.
First,
Thank you.
You heard it here first. Okay.
Please use it. If you do multi-phasic power pop too, also you use it too.
Keeping the focus on this specific album, the title, Kite to Camden. And, without giving away any spoilers or anything like that, I think this is already out there in the world. I have a theater background. And one thing that they always ask you in theater is when you're going through a new play is, what does the title mean? How does it relate to the work? Why? There's nothing that is just done just because playwrights have a reason, right? So you as a songwriter, as a producer, what does Kite to Camden mean for you in this album?
I am huge about titles, huge, whether it's albums, songs, books, whatever. And when I spot a title that someone else came up with that's perfect, I give props to that because to me, the title is as important as the lyrics themselves.
Absolutely.
So it took me a while to, honestly, the Weird Objective was originally called Music is Not a Genre. Mm-hmm. And it just didn't work for me. And I realized weird to me was not combining music, was going places that maybe Rec doesn't usually go. And so that was my objective for that project. I called it the Weird Objective. And I could go for each album and tell you what all those mean. But for Kite to Camden, that was a title that I came up with 30 years ago, something like that. Wow. And I've been weaving stories around it. And you can see the cover of the album, Fade. And for those of you just listening, I faded to the cover of the album and the video. Go to the video section.
There's a real advantage in doing your interview on your own.
On your
podcast, I have to admit.
Right?
Smart.
And so you see me running with bare feet. I like to perform as Rec in bare feet and flying a kite. And that kind of punches the fact that there's a kite in the name. And the cover has multicolors, which is artificiality imposed upon the natural world or the man-made world, like cities and things like that, to show the amalgam of organic material and synth material, that kind of synthetic electro, whatever. And that I grew up in Camden County, right near Camden, New Jersey. I love Camden in London. There's now a Camden, Maine I've been through that looks beautiful. And so for some reason, Camden has become important to me. And that the idea of the kite is like a beacon to the world. Rec is on the kite. I even made t-shirts with just the kite, and you can get them at the store. And that idea of that's a signal that Rec is flying high, and it's showing a signal to another universe or whatever, which if you go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, the bonus episode for this is me talking about that other universe.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. Yes, please support the podcast. And all of that is true, because there are times where you create something and you find the meaning afterwards. So many of my lyrics, I didn't know what they meant until long after I wrote them. And then I'm like, oh my God, I was telling the future, or I was gaining insight that I didn't have, consciously. But the truth about the title is that Kite to Camden is an anagram of Nick DiMatteo. Period. And I had no use for it for years, because I was Nick for so many years. And then I was Rec, and I didn't want to be Nick. I didn't even want to associate my own name with Rec. I wanted it to be a band, an ensemble, a collective, whatever, a project. And then I was like, but what happens if those two things come together? If the most personal me comes together with the idea of Rec? Well, what better title than just messing around with my own name?
Well, and you do use the word transcendence a lot in the descriptors of this. So did you have a transcendent experience while creating it, or are you having one now that it's finished and you're putting it out into the world? How does that, you talk a lot about like the elevation to the next realm, the next moment. Do you feel personally in your life and where you're at now that this album has been created, you're elevated, seems more personal than so many other things that you've put out in some ways, or just maybe new? Just talk a little bit more on that.
I mean, kind of both. I think that you judge, or let's say not judge in the bad sense, but you figure out who you are often in contrast to the rest of the world. So when I'm in other bands, when I watch other artists, part of it is learning from them, but part of it is, oh, I'm not that, So for me to just figure out who I am, it's taken years musically, and every single iteration from all the 18 releases has been true, and it was the me at that time. But I knew there was a more complete version of that within. And so, yes, I feel like this project transcends in many ways, and that, in fact, even songs, with the exception of maybe one or two, that seem like they're just for fun or about some other thing, have lyrics that are ultimately very personal. And there were things that I said about myself, especially in all caps. I don't need to account
for everything I say. When I expound, all other sounds move out the way, because everything I say is in all caps. That's why I don't need to use all caps. Everything I say is in all caps. That's why I don't need to use all caps. Nope.
All on me.
That's all on me. On me. On me. You know it. On me.
There are lines in there, and even in Twist My Kite.
I hear you okay, I know you mean well, but it's hell and it's no fun. And you're twisting my kite.
There are lines in these songs that really reveal how I work as a person, or something that I've been through, but there's more kind of psychological insight in that way, or insight into a relationship I had, like a former production partner I used to work with, and things like that for the song You Know You're Right.
Now, I didn't want to think it's true, but I knew you, and you gotta drop the fight when you know you're right. You know I'm right. Yeah.
I went the extra mile to really kind of rip my chest open, I guess you could say. And to do that musically too, because I think it's, in a commercial sense, I think it's bold to start with what are essentially 2 instrumentals that bleed into a 5.5 minute hip hop song, that finally get into a pop song, and then on and on and on. But there was no other way to create this. That was how it was meant to be from the very beginning. And every decision I made when I crafted this, with the exception of switching songs 12 and 13, stayed exactly how I crafted it, because I had that vision and that sense from the very beginning. And when you can be that personal with the music, it is incumbent upon you to do justice to it by being that personal in the lyrics too.
Because it's a gapless album, do you have a favorite song? Or is it because you've made it into this whole journey from beginning to end, you just feel like it has to come at you whole? Or do you feel like you could really pick out a certain moment that was the moment while making it?
I think that when I got halfway through and realized, oh, this is working, that really excited me. And that's the song Rhythm 77, which is a weird, fun little song. I was just going to
ask about Rhythm 77.
Thank you.
There,
yeah.
That's what really in my brain is what I was wondering about the most.
To get to that song?
Well, yeah, it's just as far as it being like a standout moment, but I really wasn't sure.
Well, I like including, and you've mentioned this before, that the artists who are able to have humor along with the seriousness and the whatever else. Fun is not the same as humor. All of it's wonderful. But to be able to have that sense of humor, and I have humorous things in many of the songs.
You do.
But that song in particular is meant to be a mental break, a sonic break, to say, all right, you've been through a journey, 6 songs, you got another one coming up, it's all connected, but this is you're in the waiting room, kind of intermission, and it sounds like intermission music in a way. And so when I got there, I realized, oh, I can get to the end of this album now, and I'm not saying that's my favorite, my favorite is going to change. An interview I just did, the guy's favorite was almost everything about you, and someone loves Porch Step and somebody else loved All on Me and whatever, and the audience loved song Okay and all of this stuff. But I would say that right now, if you ask me, just like, every 5 years I have a different favorite Beatles album, but if you ask me right now, my favorite song, the one where I knew there was magic on this, is Eat Salvation.
Eat salvation. Salvation rules the world.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a lot more questions to get into on this, but before we do that, can you just note where people can listen to this work right now? We'll take a little break and come on back.
That sounds awesome. You read my mind. Yes. So you can get the album only on Bandcamp or Patreon for the time being. If you go to rec area, REC area, one word, .bandcamp.com, it's the first the first album right there. And for $10, buy the whole album, listen to it all the way through, or patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, and I will post a direct link to the actual album that I posted on Patreon. You can get the one shot there, 54 minutes in a row, with also a link if you would rather listen to it in individual tracks, and all you need to do is support the music and the podcast at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. Those are the only places you can get Kite to Camden right now. If depending, and we may talk about this in the second half, depending what happens with the album, I can't really tell you when it will be streaming. So please go listen to it in one of those outlets. And as she mentioned, we've come to the midpoint of the podcast. So stay tuned for my usual mid-roll, and we will be right back. Hey, thanks for checking out this episode of Music is Not a Genre. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, if you'd like to learn more about the music I do with my band Rec or any other projects or anything else about me, go to nickdematteo.com. That's Nick, DEMATTEO.com. And everything is there. There's even a link to a merch store where you can get t-shirts and mugs and hats and totes and notebooks and so many other things. I'm always adding new products there. Great way to support the podcast. And finally, go to patreon.com/music is not a genre if you really like to show your support. My fans and lovely family there get exclusives and other perks and early releases, and they get to suggest topics for future podcasts as well. Thanks for listening to the mid-roll. Now back to the show. We are back from the mid-roll with the special guest, me, Nick DeMatteo, and my interviewer, Cathryn, on the other side of this camera. Let's get right back into it. What you got for me?
Okay, so I think you're liking getting interviewed now.
I love it.
It's been interesting because we got together 7 years ago. And not long after we got together, Music is Not a Genre really started to form, really started to come together. And then, like you said, you went straight into the Weird Objective. And then now here you are, KITE to Camden. Within that 7 years, obviously, there was a global pandemic. Anybody ever experience any of that? Heard anything about that? Shit shut down. Obviously, you weren't able to perform. And you weren't really performing your own music live when we met a lot. You were in a transitional period. And so the cool thing for me seeing this over the last 7 years is, one, seeing all of your music evolve and come to life in a new way. You as a human evolve and come to life in a new way. But the one really cool thing is that I have never seen you perform your own music this much. Of course, you perform with so many other bands and stuff like that, but to really go out there and start to really perform your own stuff live more regularly, obviously, I know you have a history of doing that, but really now in the present moment. Is there anything about KITE to Camden or this new work? How has it changed performing live for you? I feel like it's very interactive in some ways with your audience. Just speak on that as far as being able to take something out live, getting it out of the studio, which is your safe place.
Well, I don't know. And yeah, I do call myself a studio rat, and it is my safe place.
You are a studio rat.
I don't know. Yeah, exactly.
I can't get him out of the studio.
It's true. I don't know that my approach. I don't know that my approach to performance has changed so much that I have changed, in that I am more, I guess, within my own like element, you could say, internally, to where I periodically through my career go through moments of doubt or crisis and decide, is this what I really want? And it used to cause me to take long breaks, which is never helpful when you're trying to build something. And when the pandemic hit, and I started to realize I need to set aside all these other things that were just about the money or just about avoidance of things that are important. Things that are important to you, you often put on the back burner because they're too scary to deal with. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Die and not have, and feel like I didn't finally go for this? So there was a sense of, and then when you make that decision where you're like, oh no, this is it for me, then everything comes out on stage. And I also wanted to make an actual effort to do more combining of the electronic with the organic. It's not that I hadn't done that before. I actually did do that quite a bit in, let's say, the 2000s, when Parts and Labor came out and all of that. We would do shows even before the album came out that included the keyboard, and it had that nice, mix of sounds. But then when I did the more electronic albums, Distance to Empty and the Sunshine Seminar, those performances were me with backing tracks, sometimes one other musician. So I decided with this that I wanted to put all of that together. And with the performances we did this year, especially the last two, we're getting there. Next year, it's going to be a whole different thing, because while I was playing bass and I loved it, it sounds like I'll be taking over on the keys. And when I'm behind the keys,
all hell breaks loose. Watch out, baby.
I'm not gonna accept a substitute of the sound that's close to what's on the recording. It's going to be that sound because I can take my rig and plug directly into the sounds that are on these songs and use the keyboard to play those sounds live. So I'm excited because it's not easy to. It's like how they say the Beatles could never have performed Sgt. Pepper live at the time, which you can do it now. It's not easy to do that, and I don't want it to sound exactly like the recording. I never do, but I want it to represent the sound of Rec live better than anything else ever has.
Oh, wow. In a perfect world, how would you prefer people to experience this album? For them to listen to it from beginning to end, to turn off all the other devices and just dig in and then go see a performance live? Do you care and you just want anything that people are interested in to just start connecting with it? What do you think would serve people best on how to approach this work?
Well, I don't want to dictate how people absorb it because everybody has their preference.
No, tell them right now.
Okay, fine.
This is exactly what you need to do.
This is what I want you to do.
I'm only kidding. No.
When I did
You're
that,
much nicer than me.
Oh, well. When I did that episode on audio files, one of the things that I made a point of saying, even though I have fundamental disagreements with being a hardcore audiophile, is that listening is a very personal experience. You do it the way it matters to you, and that you know, I love listening in the car. I love listening loud. I love listening on big speakers, whatever. I love listening with headphones if the headphones are good.
Sure.
Not phone headphones. And yeah. And so what I would say is if I could dictate and say, this is how I want you to listen to this, I would say pick the one shot or a gapless playing, listen to the entire album. It's less than an hour, which I know is a lot, but it's still not a lot either. Do it either with like big speakers that are set up right, or better yet, safety, just nice cans, just some headphones that you can put on your ears and shut out the rest of the world. They can be noise canceling, whatever, or they can at least have that sense of you're immersed in a world that is just about the music. Close your eyes. I don't care. Be on your phone. I don't care, but don't take a break. Just listen through to that. Really absorb the album. And then give it a rest. Go back and pick songs you like the best and listen to them again separately and see how they hold up, because even though I crafted it as a one experience, each one of the songs stands on its own as well. And hopefully that will compel you to A, listen to more Rec music, but B, come see us live when we're back in action in the spring of 2025. Once all of my band members are back in town, and I have retooled it a little bit and add some more members and things like that, and you can experience the difference that happens when there's interaction.
How regularly are you going to be performing live next year?
I mean, if I had my, the fan base and the ability to really book all this, I would love to do it twice a month. But I am going to shoot for somewhere between 10 and 20 performances.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what is the easiest place for people to find out about the live performances? I mean, obviously, I know you mentioned stuff here on the podcast, but I mean, what do you think is the easiest way to find out all of your info? The website?
Yeah, if you go to nickdimatteo.com/music, it has all of the links to everything you need to know about the music, the discography, the streaming, the social, blah, 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 and then the page for live performances.
Okay, great. And then just speaking about music is not a genre is a big term. Anytime I say it to anybody, they're like, "Oh, that's cool. That's a great, title or podcast name or idea, anything of that." Do you think that in intermixing so many genres into your music, and specifically into KITE to Camden, this album, you're hoping to appeal to a broader audience, or actually getting more specific with people who really do connect with that idea?
Yeah, I think so. I think what's happened with my career in general and with my music is that many of my songs have found an audience. And I'm extremely grateful for that. And people have their favorites. But it often happens, and I think this happens with a lot of artists, a lot of listeners, that love of a song or two songs doesn't translate into connecting with that artist. So I talk about on this show heart artists, which are those artists you can't live without. And often, artists don't transcend to that level where, yeah, I kind of like listening to so-and-so, but I don't need to hear everything they do. So I have already achieved on a certain level anyway. I'd love it to be more widespread. People loving and enjoying my music in pockets here and there and parts and whatever. My goal with this one, and really with the way I'm talking about my music and the way I'm presenting it and all of that, and even with the podcast, is to find my core audience, is to find those people whose love of music is vast and broad, and what excites them are, a future episode I'm doing called The Amalgam Effect, is artists who constantly listen so much that it infuses their music with multiple influences and styles, and yet they still have a distinct sound. You think of Prince, you think of David Bowie, you think of the Beatles. There's so many others where they're not this, like Rolling Stones, where they have a range of music, but they pretty much do the same thing and they do it well, right? That's, to me, not an amalgam artist. And my favorite artists are amalgam artists. I've always been that. And so my idea with this album was to say, sure, pick a favorite song, but the people I really want to listen to this are the ones who are going to fall in love with the idea that this much music can fit onto one album of this many kinds of music and still work and still be just seamlessly connected to where it doesn't sound like it's 14 different artists or 5 different artists, however you want to judge it. It sounds like the same artist just having tremendous amount of fun and passion with all kinds of music.
It really is sort of a throwback to when we always used to listen to albums from beginning to end, I used to. I'd go and grab those CDs and grew up on records, and you went from beginning to end, cassettes, of course.
Yeah.
So that's cool. So looking for that core audience, there's a lot of legends and people in the music industry and any creative industry who will say that the creative process is a really selfish one, and that you're not in the creative process to make something for other people, even though it is a gift in the end. But most artists are not in there going, oh, they're going to love this bit or they're going to love this bit. You go deep into yourself, you see what's there, you rip yourself apart, you put yourself back together, you follow the inspiration, whatever it is a completely self-immersed, selfish in the good sense experience, I find, for the artists that I know and my own self. And then once you are truly satisfied and feel really great with the work and you put it out into the world, then you can let it go and say, hey, for whoever connects to it, here's my offering, right? That being said, now that you're in that place where it's out in the world and you've had that creative process happen, what do you think you hope people get from listening to Kite to Camden?
Well, I love that you...
Or do you can you even fathom, or is that anything you can even really imagine?
Well, there's a couple of answers there. The first one is I love that you talk about how personal creation is. And I love a crafts person. I love somebody who can, I'm sorry, my dog is here and is creating havoc.
She has a little bit of a hurt leg, so she's kind of wobbly.
Olga,
give her some love.
Is making an appearance off camera here, and she's also affecting the camera. So anybody who's an animal lover there will totally understand what's happening. But the audio seems to be working well, at least this time around.
Woohoo!
So to answer this question, yes, I think that the most transcendent art starts with a degree of self-centeredness in a way, and meaning you've got to dig deep enough into yourself to find the most personal things that you can convey. But the caveat there is you also have to craft it in a way that other people can understand, because art is about communication. If you are going to make something so fucking cryptic that it takes people 15 listens, that's a wonderful experience. Some artists do that. That's not me. I don't always make things that are accessible on the first listen, but 2 to 3 listens, I believe that it will sink into you in a way that you won't forget. So that's kind of how I like to create. And there is that balance between being as self-involved as you can to bring out everything that's within you, but remembering that you're doing it for other people. There's a line in all caps that I say, sometimes I have to remind myself to think about other people. It's like my mind is the church and I can't see past the steeple. And that just means you get caught within yourself. And some of my music has definitely had that sense of being so insular that it was harder to get into. And some was by design and some was by accident, and I didn't quite know what I was doing. This, my latest music, but especially this album, is to me an achievement of being able to strike that balance between being super, super personal and super accessible and understandable. People are getting the lyrics right out of the gate, which I absolutely love, and it's meshing with the music in an amazing way. And quick side note, for the last almost decade, I have not written a single song with a gender-specific pronoun. And I say that because I believe that everybody gets something different out of what they listen to. So I can tell you what every song means to me, one-to-one. I'm happy to do that. Ask me and I'll tell you again. But I also believe somebody might listen to one of those songs and say, oh, this means this to me. And I love that even more because then it becomes personal to them. And so me taking out things like gender pronouns or knowing when to be specific and when to be universal so that people can get in there and really connect with it, it means more to me that you might think that Eat Salvation is about, I don't know, a cereal named Salvation, whatever, than what it really means to me, which then we have that conversation and then you might gain more insight, but I might gain as much insight from you.
Okay, so I love all of that, but wasn't exactly the word that I was looking for.
No, what's happening?
As you're saying it, it is becoming clear to me that the reason that this album is so exciting to see you perform live is because I do feel like it seems like the most direct work that you've put out. Like you are specifically talking to people, like you are striking up the conversation, just like you have done with the podcast. Like you really are. It is not this sort of ethereal experience. You are going direct to it. You want the connection with this one. And I think that just became a little bit more clear to me as you were talking about that. Now you've got me all sparked though, because now I'm starting to think of bigger conversations. See, this is what happens when you and I start to talk with one another, is that I hear what you give me.
Hey, want to do a podcast with me?
Exactly. How dare you? I know. And then I get a little choked up because I'm like, oh my gosh, this could go in so many directions. Stay on task.
Well, I will say while you're thinking that the idea of this being personal isn't new because everything I do is personal, but the difference I think here is, and this is more of a musical thing, I love harmonies. I love layers. I'm always going to include those. I love a sonic palette that creates a landscape and blah, blah, blah words, whatever the descriptions are. But I vowed this time around to not hide myself in any way.
Yeah, I think that's what I was really looking for. Is like that's what I mean by clarity. I've never seen you really come out of the gate with being like, here it all is. You know what I mean?
Which is why I wanted that first song that has, well, it's not the first song that has lyrics, but it's the first song that has real lyrics. This song, track 3, to be all about the words, which of course hip hop is, but in particular, that being such a slightly longer song than a single and all of that, to throw, and that was about 1/5 of the lyrics that I wrote and just threw out 80% of them because they didn't work for the song, and honed it down to the ones that made sense together and sounded good. And there's almost nothing else on there. I mean, of course, there's a beat, there's a bass, and there's drums and whatever, and some other, backups, but it's almost just me just spouting words. And that was hard for me to do because I'm not hiding behind anything.
So along with that, here's what I really wanted to get to with that, and I do love the fact that you are not hiding. You are an artist who opens yourself up, as you say in this podcast. You want the connection and you want the conversation. to happen. And there are not a lot of artists out there, I think, that really, really, they want the connection, of course, because that's amazing, but to really ask people for the conversation element, you know, in the age of social media, things can get crazy online, stuff like that. But I've never seen somebody really invite, I guess, for lack of a better word, feedback. Or just, again, conversation, you know, how you can pop it in the comments. What did you think of this episode? What did you think of, you know, the themes that you're speaking about through Music Is Not a Genre? Do you welcome that kind of conversation around the listening of this album, KITE to Camden?
I do. I welcome it the way I welcome it for the podcast. And I think the podcast sort of got me in shape for that, because even though I've always said, tell me what you think, blah, 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 as an artist... Right.
Okay, that was perfect. Tell me what you think.
That's the quote.
Blah, blah, blah.
Tell me what you think, blah, blah.
Yeah, that's the shine.
As an artist, you get you get very sensitive, right?
Yeah.
So you can ask for it and be open about it, and then somebody says it, and you're like, no, that's not what I meant, or oh, how could you say that, or whatever. When you do it through a podcast where, sure, it's still personal, but you're talking about a bunch of other subjects and artists and things like that, you get more used to feedback. Agreement, disagreement, and I always present myself as somebody who has a strong opinion but respects other people's, if not opinion. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but their desire to want to express what they think and what they know. And now I'm so used to it that I bring it on. Like, tell me that about my music too. And of course, it's going to be more personal, and it's going to be harder to take in some ways, but in other ways, it's going to be more transcendent when somebody comes in and tells me they heard something in a song they hadn't heard before or whatever. Why do this and not want to be connected? And I know some artists, the only way they connect is through their art, and that's wonderful, and I get it. And yet I feel like I can't help but want conversation. It's one of my favorite things in the world.
You do love it.
You know, end of every podcast, music, conversation, connection. And I won't say that it's easy for me all of the time, depending on the subject, but it's always welcome. And man, especially with this album, just go listen. Tell me what you think. Tell me, I didn't like track whatever, but I really like track whatever. I've had critics do that where they were like, this album, the Metro Grand Sessions, he's trying to be XYZ, but I really liked Come a Little Closer and It's Almost Over, or whatever it is. That's, well, shoot, great. You know, so I disagree with you on a lot of what you said, but I respect your opinion, and yet you still walked away with something of value. You know.
Well, I will say that it's been a real honor, as always, since the beginning when we got together, to see your process. The last 7 years have been a journey, and there has been a lot of difference in seeing you put this one together behind the scenes and really get into it. I mean, you have a incredible focus and respect for your creative process, which is always inspiring to me. Sometimes that's the hardest part, is just to make sure that what you're doing is your life's work and important to you, for sure. And I always respect you with that. And so it's been cool now that you're at this point. You're really at the end of one part of the process, and now at the very beginning, as far as releasing it, putting it out there, getting the feedback, doing the live shows. I think these are the most fun I've ever seen you perform doing this work with the band. So I would highly recommend everybody, of course, if you can, get out there, give it a listen, do it for yourself, take the time. And then, of course, if you can pop out to a live show next year, I think that you will be I think you'll just have a damn good time. So is there anything else that you have not expressed about this work? Again, KITE to Camden, the album, that you want to express right now? Anything that you really just are hoping to put out there?
Yeah, I mean, there will always be. There's so much there.
Well, this isn't the end. There's to be continued, of course. I know, but
and I'm toying with the idea of doing individual videos or whatever, talking about each song, kind of like, what do they call it, storytellers or whatever, where you say, oh, this is the song, and that's fine, and I could do that for every single song in my catalog, but particularly for this album, I think the only other thing I want to say about this album, because we did kind of capture the idea that it's a journey from beginning to end, and yet the songs, stand alone, is that if you go to recarea.bandcamp.com, at least for now, in particular, it does describe what I see as the vision for this album, what I see as again, it's not necessarily a story where there's a plot, but there is a journey. And it does describe very briefly what that journey is.
And it grabs you from the beginning. Like, you really know you're on a ride from the beginning. So it doesn't so you don't have to sit around and wait. You get into it right away. I will say that.
Good. Thank you. Yes. And that's the idea. And the thing is, it is a nonstop ride. Again, with that break in song 7, if you need a break. But each song is a different facet of that ride.
A multi-phasic power pop.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think sometimes Journey, I know that Journey can encompass a lot of things and people use it, all the time for stuff, but it moves. It moves. You are immediately pulled in.
Good.
You go in there. That's why I thought the way that you had hoped people would listen to it would be in that, seamless from beginning to end, being able to take it on there. Cause it's cool. It really is. It's so a tribute to the past, but so focused highly on where you're going and clearly focused on the future. It's really awesome.
Thank you.
What do we do next? Tell us. Where do they go? Tell the people.
So,
where can you listen?
Again,
where can you find?
I will say it again because it's vital. The whole idea with this was for you, the drum up interest for you to listen to it. recarea.bandcamp.com is where you can listen to the album for now. And again, I have no prediction as to when this is going to stream. So you kind of have to go there. Or patreon.com/musicisnotagenre if you want to hear the one shot and have the option to listen to all of the tracks separately as well and be able to support monthly everything I do here, which again, and I said this last week in that brief bonus episode, as much as I absolutely love Music Is Not a Genre and everything I've been doing with this podcast and all of you fans and people who are listening and watching and commenting, the main reason I do this is for the music, is for my music. And so, like I said last week, nothing that I'm doing in the creative world is more important to me right now than this album, Kite to Camden.
Excellent. Thanks for having me today, babe.
Yes. And thanks for having me as your guest on my show. Thank you to Cathryn for being such a wonderful interviewer.
I did not tap into how much me was included into this, but to be continued.
Yeah, you got some of you in there for sure, and some other people. You'll have to listen to see what that means, but that's very interesting. And yeah, of course, there's a lot of inspiration right here in this household. So thank you, everybody, for hanging out for this admittedly weird but very fun interview about Kite to Camden. Thanks again to Cathryn. I would love to hear everything you think about the album, of course, and even just this episode. I'm putting clips of songs in throughout the episode. Hopefully, you know, that wet your whistle a little bit, because as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thanks for hanging with us. That wobble was from Olga yet again, and I will talk to you next week.
888 Salvation rules the world. 888 Salvation rules the world. Life flies at a 2x flow, slides by like a fast track show. All the changes are painfully slow, and I watch it go, then flash in a snap, it's gone. No, I guess it didn't take so long. A thin line I was dancing on. Now I'm falling. salvation. Salvation rules the world. Salvation. Salvation rules the world. And I owe it all to you. Say I'm alive, but only barely, and I owe it all to you. You got me right where you want me. You pulled me out, but you put me through. Yeah, I'm alive, but only barely, and I owe it all to you. Salvation. Salvation rules the